The Dragon of the Apocalypse has gone through many different transformations. Many, including himself, thought that the end was his final form. But soon the world will learn that the end is mere a stepping stone to Overlord's true power. Dragonic Overlord is ready to cross out history itself. Dragonic Overlord the Cross is the latest transformation for Dragonic Overlord. This form is unique as it allows Overlord to tap into the power of all its previous forms. But soon you will learn that he is merely a vessel for the end, as the Cross allows to unleash the end's full potential. Dragonic Overlord the Cross' main ability allows him once per turn for one Soul Blast to search the deck for an Overlord card and put that card into the Soul. The Cross will then copy the name and skills of that card. As we said, this card is mainly used with the end. So before we continue, let's look at the end. The end has one Vanguard skill which allows him to restand twice after he attacks. One effect allows him to restand for the cost of a Counter Blast and a Soul Blast, but only when you have 4 less cards in hand. His second effect allows him to restand for the cost of 3 discards if he has an Overlord in the Soul. This also gives the Vanguard an extra 10k power. Both these restands will force the Vanguard to lose a drive check. So by activating both effects, you will swing with Twin Drive, Single Drive, and then finally with no drives. So as we can see, the Cross allows us to always use the second restand no matter the situation, as thanks to the Cross we will have the Overlord in Soul, making it possible to swing in and then swing in another time with the extra 10k power. But this is just the starting point, as the Cross has 2 more skills to bring out the end's full potential. The Cross' first passive ability allows the player, whenever they need to count the number of cards in their hand for their abilities, to regard them as 0. So this will mean you will always restand with the end's first effect no matter your hand size. Even if you have 10 cards in hand, you can still pay 1 Counter Blast and 1 Soul Blast to restand the Cross. This will result in the fact that the moment you ride the Cross and target the end, you can attack twice with the Vanguard. This in itself is already really strong, but the Cross has one more trick up its sleeve, as he has one more passive ability to make everything a little bit stronger. Whenever the Cross is facing a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, his drive can never go lower than 1. This allows the Cross to attack with a Twin Drive, then a Single Drive, and then another Single Drive, which in turn allows him to only go -1 instead of 2 for the extra restands. These skills makes Overlord the Cross combined with the end a powerhouse to reckon with, as they can unleash a triple Vanguard swing while your opponent is still at grade 2. And don't forget, by getting critical triggers, you can stack them on the Vanguard to put pressure on all Vanguard attacks. Of course, this will mean the Overlord player is minusing their hand, but they can even go for 2 Vanguard swings and actually plus off of the extra Vanguard attack, as they can just opt to go for the Counter Blast and Soul Blast restand of the end, which gives them an extra drive check without needing to discard any cards at all. Where the Cross can win and carry games on its own, that doesn't mean you solely rely on him, as you have a whole range of dragons that support the Cross in all kinds of different ways. From draw and search power to empowering the Cross, and even in the form of actual rearguard pressure. So let's take a look at the army of fire dragons that surround the Cross. We've seen the power of the Cross, so the first thing we want to look at is how can we get to the Cross as consistent as possible. And the best way to do that is by searching for it, and the best type of searcher is Igni Road Dragon. This card allows us to check the top 7 cards for the Cross, which is a really good search effect. But on top of that, this card allows us to get some rearguard pressure, as when used in tandem with the Cross, he is a solid 20 to 25k beater that, combined with the 3 Vanguard swings, and our opponent will have a hard time guarding. Another potential searcher is Dragon Full Armored Buster. This is a weaker searcher as it has a heavy cost of 2 soul. It still searches the top 7, which is good, but as an added bonus, it can search for any Overlord. This might or might not be a good thing. It allows us to filter the deck and potentially use the end as a discard target for other skills. This is only something you want to do if you can guarantee to have a target left in deck for the Cross the moment you go into the Cross. Luckily, we have cards that allow us to put the ends from the drop zone back into the deck, but more on that later. The third and final searcher is Lava Flow Dragon. This is a generic grade 3 searcher. Sadly, it doesn't plus us in card advantage, but it gets the job done, and because it's a grade 1, it allows us to spread the searchers over our different grades instead of potentially cluttering one grade type, which could compromise the power output of the deck. Now, with our search options covered, we want ways to capitalize on the fact that our Vanguard swings in thrice. We already seen this with Igniro Dragon, that he can become a solid beater, but we can take that up a notch. A direct power upgrade is Burnrise Dragon. This promo card allows us to turn it into a 25k double crit unit. It does cost a counterblast and a discard, but if we combine this with the cross in the correct way, we can close games relatively quickly. If you dry check a crit on the first attack of the cross while going for force 2, you pressure your opponent to waste a lot of shield. So if you can then activate a Burnrise on top of that, that results then not only guarding 2 more Vanguard swings, but also this massive rear guard. And depending on your resources, you can have 2 Burnrises on the field, or you can activate the same Burnrise twice in a single turn to overwhelm your opponent. Now, of course, this is more rearguard focused pressure. Let's take a look at Vanguard focused pressure. The first card we take a look at is Heatshot Dragon. This card is a nice early game cycle card for more consistency, but the main value is in his restand effect. This allows him to boost all of the cross Vanguard attacks. So instead of the attack numbers being 13k, 23k and 23k, it is now 21k, 31k, 31k, which is a lot tougher to guard, especially in the early game. Another powerful grade 1 and the main culprit in making the cross as devastating as he is Calamity Tower Wyvern. This card allows you to empower the Vanguard with an additional 15k. This on a double restanding Vanguard is devastating, especially if you think you still have a force marker and the drive checks to add on top of that. Another grade 1 that allows you to empower your Vanguard is Flame of Scorching Heat Gibble. This card is a bit more restrictive as you need to boost with it to give the Vanguard 5k power, which means you probably need to attack with a rearguard first. Or you can boost the Vanguard as without Heat Shot you can only boost one attack. The upside to this card is that it generates soul, which can fuel cards like the Cross, Calamity Tower Wyvern, as well as Full Armored Buster. Back in the grade 2 department, we have 2 more interesting cards that empower the Cross. Prowling Dragon Striken is an interesting card that gives up your grade 2 Vanguard string, but in turn will give the Cross an extra 5k and an extra crit. This can be a great option if you went second and you don't want to give your opponent extra resources for their first grade 3 turn. If you have the resources, then this can give you a grade 3 Vanguard that is either 28k double crit or an 18k triple crit without any extra effect that will swing in thrice. This can be absolutely devastating. However, keep in mind this costs a counterblast and one of your restands also costs a counterblast, so your opponent can damage deny you to lower the value you can get out of your next turn. Another interesting grade 2 is Wyvern Strike the Cat. This grade 2 works with the cross as it copies the name of the end. This card effectively makes perfect guards less effective as they cost 3 cards from hand, which force your opponent to waste around 9 cards in hand to only block the Vanguard, and as an added bonus, this card gives you even more soul for your other cards. Another great support card for the cross is Torridcannon Dragon. It gives the deck some field control and more importantly, it allows you to reshuffle the ends back into the deck, which is really good. And on top of all that, it allows you to draw, which is another way to get to your important cards. A card with similar effects is Berserk Dragon. This is a great early game card and just like Torridcannon Dragon allows you to retire a card and draw a card. Albeit a bit more overcosted, but it gets the job done. Then the final 2 cards are Sable Dragon Newt and Flame of Hope Ermo. Both of them are vital cycle cards that allows you to keep drawing into your more important pieces, and they synergize really nicely with cards like Torridcannon Dragon as well as Berserk Dragon. While on topic of Ermo, your resource in this deck can be really easy or really hard to manage. It all depends on how you build the deck. The cross uses 1 soul to activate its main ability, but then immediately refunds it. But afterwards, you need a counterblast and a soul blast to gain all its restands. So he himself doesn't need a lot of resources. But once we add on cards like the Cut, Berserk, Burnrise, Prowling and Torridcannon Dragon, and we're looking at a lot of counterblast. Luckily, most of it, if not all of them, are grade 2s, so there is a limit to how much actually can be played, and luckily we have air mode to compensate for a certain amount of counterblast. Then for soul, this can be a bit tricky, as we want to keep an overlord in the soul, so that means we have a very limited amount of soul to work with. And with full armored bustard, calamity towered wyvern and berserk dragon as support cards that also rely on soul, means we have some issues. We do have ways to replenish this with cards like Gibble, the Cut and even Dragonic Gaias, but most of them cost a counterblast to gain the soul. So soul might be your most limiting factor. So plan around your soul and try to keep rewriting when possible, not for the marker, but for the extra soul. In this deck you have two options in terms of your triggers. Do you want to go full dominance and the ultimate cheese factor, or do you want to go for pure consistency and get the same outcome for most of your games? The difference in your choice basically comes down to, do you run 8 critical triggers or do you run more than 8? The basic trigger build is 8-4-4, as you want to get to those critical triggers as early as possible to capitalize on your multiple Vanguard swings. However, those draws, and mainly draw PGs, can come in handy during those moments you're missing a vital piece. Now, that said, you can opt to go for the crit count all the way up to 16. This all comes down how comfortable are you with dropping draws and heals. As the upside to running 16 crit is that you only want to see a trigger instead of a specific trigger. As if you go for the turn free kill play, then playing heals makes no sense, as you are most likely on lower damage anyways. So decide carefully how far you want to go, as you can definitely go for 9, 10, 11 crits, etc. Now for the marker, this all comes down to your build and your hand. Both markers can work with the cross very effectively. Do you run a lot of crits and are they still in your deck? Then going for Force 1 can make it really tough to guard your Vanguard, especially if you have something like Gaia's behind your Vanguard. But is your hand filled with cards that gives your Vanguard a lot of power, then Force 2 can be a great option, as you can likely pressure them with triple crit Vanguard swings. It also depends on your opponent's hand size and damage count, so try to experiment with both markers, as they both have important roles to play in this deck. Now let's take a look at some different builds that we can make for the cross, and this is where we're going to do it a little bit different. Instead of showcasing free builds, I'm going to showcase different builds without a fixed number, and I will give quick remarks on each build so you have more ideas how these decks can be built, and also a better vantage point to start from if you want to build your own deck. We begin with a more popular build that has a nice balance of consistency and power plays. We can see of course the 4-4 split in the grade 3, so we have the best chance of getting them. We can also see the two different cross searchers and decent amount of draw potentials in the like of Torridcannon, Berserk Dragon and Ermo. Torridcannon also allows us to reuse the end, as we can Soul Blast a the end and then shuffle it back into the deck and then search it back out with the cross, which allows us to keep reusing the same copy. This also allows us to get a the end off of Lava Flow without worrying that we might have no targets later on. The Cut together with Calamity Tower Wyvern gives us enough options to empower the cross to powerful levels. The Cut is also a nice option to make PGs less effective, and basically a great tag option against Protect 1 decks. In terms of plays, this is as basic as it gets. You use your cards to get to your the cross the end play as consistent as possible, and then try to outpressure your opponent from the point onwards with a strong the cross or the cross with a Battledoria effect. Now this list is less about direct power and more about pure consistency. We have 3 searchers for the cross, as well as Torridcannon Dragon to reshuffle the end back into the deck, as well as triggering our grade 1 draw cards. That said, we have a total of 3 different cards that allows us to draw. You might think that running Dragon Full Armor Buster is too much for the soul, but you are using him only once in the game, and that is on turn 2 to get to your the cross. All the other copies are just beat sticks or discard fodder. The main idea is simply to get to your cross and win off of the restand Vanguard pressure. With the added draws and higher shield value in your triggers, you should survive long enough for the cross to close games. Also, don't forget, you can hard plus on the cross if you only use the Counterblast Soul Blast restand effect. As you probably can tell from the 16 crits, this is a super aggressive deck. This deck is a bit more high rolly as it has less draw power, but in return has massive firepower. 16 crits, multiple cards that empower the Vanguard for all the attacks, and of course the nasty Battledore effect to make PGs less effective. The idea, you guessed it, is to attack with the cross. but in this build you really want to resolve a Calamity Towered Wyvern to make him almost unguardable. As an added bonus, this list has Striken as a core card to potentially flash out a victory out of nowhere, whereas you can swing in with a powerful triple crit or potentially quadruple crit Vanguard. Of course, playing with Striken means you're more counterblast reliant, so be careful when using it, as your opponent can deny you your powerful grade 3 turn and then effectively make you waste your second turn. Now we have two more lists to showcase, which both bring something unique to the table. This deck has two interesting changes. One, we see the inclusion of Burnrise Dragon, but also a card we haven't talked about. Purple Gem Carbuncle. If you've seen our Blade Master Sohan Spotlight, you might be familiar with this card, as it can be a great 20k booster. However, in this deck, it's way more aggressive, as thanks to the cross, you can activate it the turn it is played. So with the inclusion of these cards, as well as the power lines Kagero Dragon can create, we can actually make this build a lot more rearguard heavy. Most the cross decks rely on Vanguard pressure with the occasional strong line thanks to Kagero, but this deck actually makes powerful side columns and capitalize on the Vanguard pressure to make the side columns way more threatening. The cut is such a tool that facilitates this playstyle, as it means your opponent most likely will waste more cards on guarding the Vanguard, which means they have less guard to stop your rearguard attacks. And this is where Carbuncle, Kagero, and especially Burnrise comes into play, as they can easily create over 30k and potentially over 50k columns, and with the natural potential of the extra crits in Burnrise, makes it ideal for a final turn scenario. Now this list takes the cross build and flips it kinda on its head. Most the cross are focused on quick victory, but this deck also has a late game plan thanks to Dragon Knight Nizar. This card allows us to potentially force our opponent to go -6, and with some field control with a card like Torridcannon Dragon, we can at least force our opponent to discard a couple of cards. Now this might look really slow, but thanks to the cross, we can actually activate this skill on the second grade 3 turn, as long as we can rewrite back into another the cross, as using its skill twice means we put 2 DNs in the soul, so that are 3 grade 3s. The only issue is that by doing it during that turn means we lose one of the restands, as we don't have an Overlord in the soul. So ideally, you want to wait one more turn, but depending on the scenario, going ahead and activating Nizar on turn 4 can actually win you the game. The rest of the deck and playstyle is your typical the cross deck, with the only added bonus that you have a late game blowout card if your opponent isn't paying attention. Dragonic Overlord the cross is an amazing new card for the Overlord playstyle or Kagero in general. It really shows how powerful a Vanguard centric deck can be, with of course the added downside that if you can't get into the cross, you basically turning most of your cards sideways and pray. But thanks to the powerful support cards, that is unlikely to happen. The deck, as simple as it may be in its playstyle, has enough options and variations to differ for each and every individual. Of course, you might wonder why we haven't addressed the other 2 Overlord cards, the original Overlord as well as the Great. And that is because they are effectively a weaker DN. They achieve the same, but are much weaker as a result, making the deck a lot less consistent. But who knows, maybe we get some more amazing new Overlord boss units in the future that can synergize with the cross. Now use this video as a stepping stone to evolve your Overlord deck and start crossing out your enemies. Thank you for watching one of the deck spotlights for VBT08. If you're interested in more content, then I highly recommend you guys to check out our other deck spotlights for this set or sets that came before that. And if your video isn't out yet, then sit tight, because we're going to upload those videos very soon, including budget decks for this particular set. But in the meantime, I want to thank my Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider for making this video and everything else on the channel possible. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply do that by going over to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one.